Topic 6.
Yella number 2, the U.S. is negotiating a deal among Saudis and Israelis and Egyptians over the transfer of 2 islands. The Biden administration has been quietly mediating among Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Egypt on negotiations to finalize the transfer of 2 strategic islands in the Red Sea from Egyptian control to Saudi sovereignty. 5 U.S. and Israeli sources told Axios, which sidebar has been on fire recently with the exclusive reporting. If an arrangement is reached, it would be a significant foreign policy achievement for the Biden administration in the Middle East. Richard, we talked a little bit about this earlier. We can now get into it, sink our teeth into it now.
Well, it's an interesting story, and that's why it has a logic of its own, and that's why I don't think the reference to normalization applies here. I mean, the fact that they're talking, okay, that's fine, but there's a specific reason and need for the Israelis and the Egyptians and the Saudis to all be in the same room talking about this topic. And for background, I know, Lucian, you did some research on this and we're familiar. So the Tehran and Sanafir Islands are at the bottom of the Gulf of Aqaba, which goes up, and it basically through the Gulf of Aqaba is Israel's only access to the Red Sea. These 2 islands at a key choke point, and in fact, Egyptians, closing off the Strait of Tehran was what provoked the 67 war with Israel. And the reason the Egyptians had control of Tehran and Sanafir was because this is originally Saudi territory. And in 1948, when Israel and the neighboring Arab states were at war, Saudi Arabia, which was Tehran and Sanafir Saudi territory, King Abdulaziz ibn Saud agreed with King Farouk, head of Egypt, in 1950 to say, look, Ibn Saud said, I don't have any kind of maritime capability to defend this. Well, you take over and man this. And King Farouk said, yes. So in 1950, it switched over to Egyptian control, essentially, and monitoring. But again, in 56, during the Suez Canal incident, Israelis took it over. Israelis controlled it from 67 to 82. So it's been a point of contention. So what's happened here, and I'll get to the point why it matters, is what's happened here is that in 2017, Egypt, went through a legislative and then ultimately just an executive decision by the president to return control of the islands to Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia now has control of the islands, and what was agreed on in the 79 agreement between Egypt and Israel, that there be a multinational force and observers on the island, so it could never be used in an aggressive way again. But here's the problem. Tehran and Sanafir are within the purview, within the territorial boundaries of NEOM. So if you're doing this multi-billion-dollar project, new city, a whole new initiative, sort of a mind-blowing attempt to build something new, you really can't have this territorial dispute. Right on the edge. So it's great. It's great that the U.S. has moved in here and offered to mediate. And I think the Israelis want to just make sure it's never used in an aggressive manner again. The Israelis, I think, want to keep the multinational force on the islands. Saudis, may or may not want to, but I'm sure the Saudis would agree it would never be used in an aggressive or offensive way ever again. So anyway, that's why when we talked about it earlier, the implication that this is normalization of a larger relationship is way, way, way too early. This is an approach and a mediation to resolve a specific dispute.
A specific dispute that has the potential to sort of unlock, a couple of other sort of domino agreements. There's the Axios article has a great sort of rundown. I think Richard, your rundown was really, really good. Brett McGurk from the White House Middle East coordinator, Biden administration point person on this, it's sort of an opportunity to sort of say, okay, well, if Israel's in the mix here, maybe there's a chit that Saudi Arabia can give Israel. They're talking about potentially using Saudi airspace for Israeli flights. I mean, it's the type of thing that can start to thaw relations or warm relations. But I don't think this is anything close to, hey, we're going to normalize relations over these two islands. It's definitely not that simple. And but very, very encouraging to see the White House in the mix here, to see this sort of getting some steam. Richard, I mean, the other point that I want to mention is one that you actually already mentioned, but these two islands are in between Neom and Sharm el Sheikh. And I believe they're uninhabited. But very strategic point right at the entrance of the Gulf of Aqaba. So it is a very interesting story. And it's also, it's progress for both the U.S. Saudi relationship, because there's some sort of thing that they can work on together here, but also just in potentially a down the line, a big diplomatic victory for the United States, for Saudi Arabia, for all involved, really.
I agree. It's a nice opportunity to be cooperative. And I mean, the Saudis and Israelis have been talking offline for years, and they have channels and there's communication ongoing, certainly in terms of defense and security things. I bridle a little bit the normalization because it's always the Western media aspirations, but also, I'll be honest, I think it's a little, King Salman in particular feels very strongly about the Palestinian issue, as do many Saudis. But this is something that he lived with and grew up with, and it's close to his heart. And I just soon not talk about, normalization, as he's been in and out of the hospital, and there's speculation, this sort of thing. But again, also, I don't see what the Israelis are going to trade for it, because they're not going to substantially rewrite their West Bank and Gaza policies.
No, and just last week, I believe that IDF forces shot and killed a Al Jazeera journalist, which angered much of the Arab world. So. It's not as if that whole situation is on the precipice of peace by any means. So,
and I don't see Israel's reaching some sort of accommodation as East Jerusalem as capital of the Palestinian state, in return for normalization with Saudi Arabia. I just don't know what the trade chips are. So maybe we'll just, as you point out, and I think it's a fair point, maybe they'll just roll up these smaller accommodations and opportunities to cooperate, and eventually get to a working relationship that is maybe sub-diplomatic or sub-normalized or sub-official. I don't know. Maybe they'll just jump to the end. But again, I don't see Saudi Arabia has more to consider about its choice of normalizing relationship with Israel than do UAE or Bahrain or Morocco or Sudan. And they'll be more careful about it. The consequences are greater. The prize for Israel is massively greater. But I don't know what Israel's going to trade to do it.